Hi all. Our instructive game today will have the theme of Restrain, Blockade, Undermine and Queen. So to demonstrate this four sequence process, I'm choosing the game Efim versus Yuri Averbakh. Geller, by the way, had a good record against Fischer. It may have been a plus score even. Averbakh had a very good plus score against our hero of yesterday, Nesmetnov. Averbakh was also, by the way, he obtained the Grandmaster title in 1952, a world title candidate in 1953, and he also was president of the Soviet Chess Federation between 1972 and 77. In this game, he was playing black against Geller. It was in the Kiev Championship of 1954. So let's kick off. E4 was played by Geller, C5, and after knight F3, knight C6, Geller played the quite passive system D3. So the kind of coiled spring system against the Sicilian. So White's not trying to do anything very sharp. And in this kind of position, Averbakh is well known for his quiet positional play. He's a very good strategist. He plays bishop d7 now. And with this, he's probably eyeing the idea later that he might be able to play bishop c6 and challenge this bishop on g2. After knight c4, he plays a very important move strategically, I think. He plays now d5. So not only is he tearing open this diagonal later, this bishop diagonal, he's also creating a semi-open file on that d-pawn later, so he can pressurise White's d-pawn and probe it, and later blockade via the d5 square. So this pawn structure change is very important here. After e takes d5, knight takes d5, rook e1, black now plays queen c7, so knight g5, so something has to be done about this knight. Averbakh is not afraid to move it to b6, and after knight e3, he stops any a5s from White, he plays a5. So this hole here is not really exploitable, so that's not a big deal. After h4, White shows some aggressions on the king side. Averbakh plays though very calmly and positionally. He plays h6, and after knight e4, he plays knight d4. So he's tempting White's pawn to come to c3 to evict that knight from d4. But also note he's made way for the bishop to come to c6 to challenge this fianchetto bishop. So there's a couple of ideas here. First of all though, White plays h5, and then Averbakh simply plays g5. So he's slightly weakened his king, and now the knight gets evicted back to f5. So he's loosened White's pawns though, especially this d-pawn. So if black can arrange d-file pressure, this pawn's going to be a great one to blockade. So after queen b3, knight d6, and now knight d5 was played. So here Averbakh, he played knight takes d5, queen takes, and he simplified further. And now he played rook b8. So this pawn can't be taken because of the skewer against the rook. So queen d5 was played, trying to get the queen out of trouble. It goes now to quite an obscure square. It goes to the a2 square. So that's quite interesting. Perhaps it could have just he could have just retreated it back to e2 here, or bishop e3. So it's a very interesting way of playing it. He's protecting the a pawn though, I suppose. After bishop c6 though, White's king is a little bit in trouble. After these light square bishops are exchanged, black seems to have a very pleasant position. To queen c4, takes on g2, and now queen c6 check. So the queen's occupying that nice diagonal now. And after queen e4, Averbakh doesn't mind the double pawns. He plays rook fd8. These double pawns would be quite good for black to gain more pressure, especially on d3 and b2. And later black can even maybe come up with a king march and then play f5. Black will have a very pleasant endgame. So Geller tried to avoid this. He played actually bishop e3, and now we see rook d5. Now this is the first stage of that plan I mentioned, which is kind of the instructive theme for the game. First, Averbakh wants to encourage, the white pawn to come to d4, and then he'll be later undermining this pawn chain. So we're going to see that in action now. So rook d8, king f1 to try and get it off that dangerous diagonal. Now c4. After d4, we see queen takes a4, so nabbing a pawn. Let's have a quick look though at why the king had to move and why the rook had to leave this pawn unprotected. In this position, if the rook had moved here, rook e to d1, then there would be f5, and this diagonal is really dangerous for a discovered attack on the white king. For example, queen f3, g4, so the queen has to leave this diagonal. So it goes to e2, and now f4 is crushing. This is a real crushing position, because g takes would lead to mate, with rook takes h5, king g3, rook h3, king g4, queen g2 mate. Otherwise, bishop takes e5, rook e5 here is very, very strong as well, winning the queen. So that's why perhaps white just lost this a pawn. So after losing the a pawn though, we see now that black is able to now push the b pawn to b5 once the queen moves back. So g4, the queen moves back, and now this b5, b4 will be undermining white's pawn structure. So we have the second stage of the plan now. So we've got this lovely blockade on the d pawn, and white's pawn structure is kind of frozen. So it's ideal for undermining now with b5, b4. So that's what Averbakh now plays for, this undermining. So after b4, white dare not take because of the d pawn dropping off. And now after f4, it seems white has aggressive intentions against Averbach's king. But like in the Spielman game we looked at a few days ago, you know, black is able to play the luxury of his positional plan because he sacrifices to make sure his king can survive the assault. He plays now a3, just carrying on single-mindedly with the undermining strategy. And now we get the queening strategy in play. So after this a takes b, winning that key pawn, g5, it seems as though white's gaining attack. And it's here that Averbakh sacrifices a whole rook. He plays actually rook takes e5. So this sweeps away white's attack and leaves black with this positional advantage of all these pawns on the queen side. So this avalanche of pawns now, white is a whole rook up. But after rook takes e5, b takes, it's actually completely and utterly lost for white. White played here rook b5, and I'll give you 5 seconds to see if you can spot Averbach's next move here. So this is the final phase, the queening phase. After the undermining has been completely successful, what would you say is the key move here that was played? 5 seconds starting from now. The move played was rook d1. It's completely crushing. It gains time. If rook takes d1, c2, and these pawns are unstoppable. For example, rook f1, just c1 queening, that's it. The rook can't take on f7, there's nothing for white. So this was a beautiful finish, and it was actually beautifully executed series of plans here, starting with this blockade on d5, the undermining of white's pawns, and then the final queening, sacrificing material on the king side to avoid being mated. Let's have a look in overview and summary. So Sicilian defence, closed Sicilian, where black played an important strategic move now, d5. So not only was it opening up this diagonal for the bishop exchange later, it was also making the way for black to have semi-open file pressure on that d pawn. And this led to black being able to probe white into playing the move c3, because white wanted to evict this powerful knight on d4. So he ended up playing c3, which gave black the opportunity to further pressure that d pawn now after these exchanges. And unfortunately, white also lost the pawn because of his king safety issues. He managed to lose the a pawn after this check, and white had some technical difficulties here. So he ended up losing a pawn because it was difficult to parry against the doubling of rooks on the d pawn with the king on this line. So in this position, black nabbed that a pawn after first playing c4, then queen takes a4. So this led now to this undermining strategy, b5, b4, undermining that pawn chain, a classic technique. And once the pawn chain was undermined, all black had to be concerned about was not being mated. So he even sacrificed an entire rook to stave off White's attack, and just emphasised now his positional trump on the queen side, which was his army of pawns. So a whole rook down, so his now final phase is to queen these pawns, and he does so spectacularly with the move rook d1 as the final move. I hope you enjoyed that game. Please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.